and update your name so that we know a little bit about the person behind the profile, where you're coming from, and what brings you to this festival with us today. So to kick us off, I'm going to do a tiny bit of scene setting just about the EdTech Hub for those of you who don't know. So the Hub is a global research partnership. Our goal is to empower people by giving them the very best evidence in order to make decisions about technology and education. We are very proud and privileged to be supported by FCDO, the World Bank, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. What you're going to explore with us today is a whole aspect of our work that is really activating the evidence. So we talk about making sure that people have the right evidence to make good decisions about EdTech. Part of how we do that is supporting them to use that evidence through either implementation support or support through technical assistance. The way that we do implementation support is through a methodology called sandboxing, where we create the space to test and grow ideas in conditions of uncertainty. And boy, have we had conditions of uncertainty over the past year. So lots of stories and hard-won lessons to share with you all on that front. We work with amazing teams on the ground who you're going to meet today and support them with funding, hands-on support, tools, access to evidence, connections into academia and other expertise, and so on. We also provide technical assistance where we share information and expertise, instruction, and work directly with country governments to make sure that that evidence is being put to good use.
Yeah, thanks, Lee. And one of the things people talk about a lot within EdTech and things you've all heard and spotted before is how easy it is for people to focus on the kind of products or the tech side of EdTech. So really, today we wanted to lean into the fact that we know it's so often much more than that. There are so many other factors that kind of make or break an intervention. And so today we're going to be hearing from the people who have been involved in both sandboxes and technical assistance, and just really exploring beyond the tech, like what does it take to implement EdTech effectively?
So it is our honor today to introduce you to the voices of the Festival of Voices. And these are people from our community who have been working super hard over the past year, responding to school closures due to the pandemic. And really it's their work, it's their life work to make EdTech work for those who need it most. So yeah, we're going to introduce them to you now, and you're going to be hearing from them throughout the course of the festival.
So hopefully everyone can see my screen. Here you can see some of the faces, the voices of the festival, if you will. And on the right-hand, top right corner there, you can see the DeafReach team, Sarah, Taiba, Ramsha, and DeafReach is an organization who've been providing sign language videos on laptops in Pakistan. That's what we were exploring together in the sandbox. As well as Michelle, who you can see there from Jasur, with whom we were testing WhatsApp-based learning for refugees in Lebanon.
We also have Tracy and Rebecca, who are with us from Keep Kenya Learning. They've been supporting and helping caregivers to foster learning at home, which, as you know, lots of people have had to do over the past year. We also have Craig from Mango Tree, who's testing new ways to make radio work for children in Uganda. And of course, we also have people from across the EdTech Hub. We have Alison, who's been involved in technical assistance to the government of Bangladesh. We have Casper, who's been doing similar work with technical assistance in both Kenya and Zanzibar. And we have Asad and Miranda, who've been working closely with all of the sandbox teams.
So how are we planning on running today's event? We promised you a festival. And so, of course, we have created a festival map. When I say we, I mean Tracy, one who you just were introduced to by Lee, who's made this gorgeous festival map for us. So thank you, Tracy, for that. The idea is that we're going to spend the next couple of hours moving around the map together. And so what that will involve is us sharing some of the kind of principles that we've identified for guiding implementation, both in our sandbox and technical assistance work. But really hearing from some of these inspiring people who've been involved in the sandboxes and technical assistance and hearing their examples. There'll be a lot of kind of passing the mic between us, and we're hoping it's going to feel a bit more like a conversation. Yeah, for us, part of that is that we're really highlighting all the different voices, all the different people involved in this type of work. And for us, that also includes you, which is why at certain points throughout the event, we've made time for some kind of smaller group discussions. So you can really discuss with one another and hear from the other experts in the room, who can share your experiences too. So that's our introduction. I think our first kind of moment for you to get to know one another or meet people in the room is going to be some virtual networking. Miranda.
Hello everyone. Yes, my name's Miranda and I'm part of the EdTech Hub too. I'm delighted to be helping to host this event today. So the first thing is get to know one another. You know, it's so sad these days that we don't have enough opportunities to go to events in real life, and it's hanging around the coffee pot or the teapot that's where you end up bumping into people and making new friends. And it's some of those moments that we're going to recreate now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put you into breakout rooms. So you're going to meet two other people, but one at a time. So you'll have 3 minutes to say hello and see where each other are from, and also why you're excited to be here today. So get a little bit curious about who are the voices that you want to hear from today. And also, if you have a moment, please write down on a piece of paper in front of you your name and where you're from. And we'd love to spend just a minute when everyone comes back, holding that piece of paper up to the screen and getting a bit of shots, a kind of screenshot altogether of who is in the room. So I'm going to put you into breakout room now, so you just see something pop up on your screen to ask you to join, and enjoy meeting someone new, I hope, or seeing an old friend.
Thanks, Miranda. So great to see people that, like you said, old friends, new faces, super exciting. So I'm going to bring us back to our festival map. You can see the festival map, yeah? And our first stop, or maybe I should say stage, in the festival is here, where we're going to be exploring the first 3 principles that are all about implementation through iteration. And to kind of guide us through that, we have the wonderful Asad, who has been supporting the implementation of EdTech in response to COVID in our sandboxes, as well as hearing some examples from DefReach, Jasur, and from some technical assistance work that EdTech Hub has been taking part in Bangladesh. So I will just hand over to you, Asad.
Thank you, Alice. And yeah, welcome everyone to the implementation through iteration stage. Asad from the EdTech Hub. I'm emceeing, but Sarah, Michelle, and Alison will be the main performers, and I'll hand over to them in a sec. I'm calling in from Kigali in Rwanda, so my connection is awful. If I drop off, then I don't know what we'll do, but let me know. And there's also a really loud cat in the background, so if you hear that, sorry. But I'm going to start by introducing these 3 principles that we hold very dear to ourselves and the work we do in sandboxes. Principle 1 is to always be problem and needs centered with a clear focus. So in EdTech and in a lot of work with tech, there's always a tendency to think of the product rather than the problem. In other words, I guess to start with a solution or approach or technology, and then try to retrofit that to a problem, even where it might not be the most effective solution. So when we work with partners, we try to really understand the context and whole experience of people so that we can design EdTech that meets their problems. Because by understanding their context, you learn about the problems that need to be solved. And we're really lucky to work with partners that often have a really, really deep understanding of where they're working. And you'll hear from them in a sec. The second principle, and one that defines a lot of how we work, is to always systematically experiment through real world implementation. So working with EdTech often means working in conditions of uncertainty. If we were building schools, we'd be certain of what works, but we're not. We're doing things with radio, with WhatsApp, with videos, with tablets. So there's much less certainty. All there is are assumptions about what works. And we encourage our teams, whenever they're working in sandboxes, to test these assumptions systematically and to test them in the real world. And then to use the data from that to either iterate what they're doing or double down on it. And the more data we get and the quicker we get it, the more we save ourselves time and money by not doing what doesn't work. So it's always important to be really humble and to be scientific in trying to embody this principle. And just quickly, the last principle that we're going to talk about before I hand over, is that we try as much as we can in our work to narrow the gap between theory and practice. And we do this in several ways. We've been fortunate enough to have hundreds of applications to work with us in the sandbox. And in selecting the ones that we worked with, we focused on ideas and EdTech interventions that had very, very strong pedagogical practice baked in and were grounded on a really robust evidence base. It was really important that we were doing things that either somewhere else or in other contexts had been proven to work, at least in some way. We also support partners to make use of existing evidence as they work. So we're very fortunate in the EdTech Hub to have world-class researchers, and we make sure that work we do is grounded in previous data and previous research on what's worked. And lastly, and maybe most importantly, we always put power in the hands of partners we work with to generate evidence for themselves. So as I said previously, evidence through systematic experimentation is really important to us, and we try and get data as we go that's just rigorous enough to help us make informed decisions. So those are three of our principles. I'm going to hand over now to some of our friends and partners who are going to talk about them a bit more. I'm going to start with Sarah. So Sarah, just before you start, I'd love you to intro yourself. And then I'd love for you to tell us all more of how you and your work have explored the context and whole experience of parents and learners that you've worked with DefReach.
Thank you, Asad. Thank you everyone for joining us. This is indeed a great event to talk about this journey of ours for the past couple of months that we've been exploring with the EdTech Hub. I'm Sarah Sheikh from DefReach, Pakistan. We run schools for skills training and academic training for deaf individuals, specifically focusing on children and their parents. Just to set context, there are over 1 million deaf children in Pakistan, and less than 5% attend school. And one of the main reasons for that is that sign language is not universal. And in Pakistan, majority of the sign language is not documented or streamlined enough for private and public sector and government schools to continue with a homogenized education format. With the onset of COVID, we had just one basic goal: to prevent language loss in these children, because you have to appreciate that deaf children have a different native language or mother tongue as compared to their parents. Most of the deaf children in Pakistan are born to hearing parents, as deafness seems to skip a generation, and the parents themselves are illiterate. So for the past many, many years, we have been testing and documenting sign language in a digital format. So we created a sign language dictionary, built a couple of stories on video format. But with the onset of COVID, we really didn't have a mechanism to really go full out and digitize our curriculum. And we didn't even know how we deliver it to the kids living in the villages or in far off places. That's where our partnership with the EdTech Hub came in. So keeping in mind that our earlier interventions were designed for use by teachers, literate coaches, and learners who would access them online, this was a big shift. And what really happened was that the learning structure between the student and the teacher in the classroom was suddenly shifted to the parent and student. And when we started off, our critical belief was that the parents would be able to support their child's learning journey at home. So to support this, we ensured that we conducted an orientation with all the parents, got them on board, explained to them where this is headed, and started creating digital content, provided a guide map to parents. But this became increasingly difficult as time passed because lockdowns, technical failures. So all these were the aspects that we had to look into as we iterated. But one of the singular things that came out of this whole exercise was that we kept on coming back to our core goal, which was to design for deaf individuals. The goal was not to say, hey, let's use phones, let's use laptops, let's use tablets, let's make digital content, let's train the parents. The goal was guided by the focus of working with deaf learners in their space. If they didn't have electricity, we'd find a battery powered solution. If their parents couldn't support them on WhatsApp, we'd give them training classes on WhatsApp. And I think that's been one of the most beautiful aspects of our journey, to work on the small things to make sure we hit the bigger goal. I think that's what I would like to really leave behind for everyone, that it was the small things that really made this program a success, and it's ongoing right now as we speak. And that's been our biggest learning, and I would say also a concept that continuously informed the design of the intervention.
Sarah, my name is Dr. Naeem Syed. I'm sorry for interject. I was happy to help you with the tool that I had developed. I would love to pass it along to you if you at any point set up some one-to-one, or I can even show in the meeting here as well.
Thank
My
you.
name is Dr. Naeem Syed, and I am based in US, but I'm working in Pakistan with underprivileged people for this tool. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Syed. We'll for sure share your, and I think everyone will follow up with all our speakers, so you can get in touch with Sarah there. Next, I'd love to hear from you, Michelle, because I know you and the work you did in Lebanon embodied these principles. And do introduce yourself before you start, so people remind themselves of who you are.
Thank you, Asad. And hello, everyone. It's nice to meet you all. I'm Michelle. I'm based in Lebanon, and I work with Jusur. I'm the research consultant for the organization. Jusur is an organization that caters for out-of-school Syrian refugee children by providing them with non-formal education. Because, as you know, Lebanon hosts a big number of Syrian refugees, and most of the children there are still out of school. So generally, we provide them education through centers that we run in Lebanon. But of course, during COVID, we had to close these centers and switch to a WhatsApp learning. We used WhatsApp as the tool to provide distance learning for these children. So when we started the program, we knew that it was actually functioning, but we still had a problem with the engagement of some children in the WhatsApp learning. And this is where the sandbox came in for us to try to iterate and improve our model. So first thing we did was to run a survey with the children who were not engaging at all and with their caregivers. And through this survey, we understood that the major barrier for their lack of engagement was the absence of technological devices, mainly the phone in their context. Because we were dealing with households who generally had one phone, but they were multiple children. So we were facing two problems here. One is the number of the devices, but the second is also the organizational aspect. Parents did not know how to manage the time around the device so that all the children could study. So based on this information, we ran two experiments in the sandbox. The first one was an information campaign that we implemented over the course of 4 weeks, and in which in each week we would send the parents a targeted and practical advice on how to help their children learn at home. So we're talking about topics like time management, setting learning space, engaging as caregivers with your children, etc. So we would send a message at the beginning of each week, and at the end of the week, we would collect the feedback from the parents to understand how useful the information was for them. The second experiment, and I would say the most important for us, was what we call the cash experiment. And this one was aimed at alleviating the physical barrier, which was the device itself. So what we did there is that in one location where Jusur operated, we offered every household a cash stipend to spend as they see fit, but we gave them the option to use the stipend to either buy a data package or rent a cell phone or use the combination of both. And after this, after the distribution, we tracked the attendance of the children, understand if and how the choice of the package was really having any effect on the attendance. So in a nutshell, these were the experiments we ran.
Thanks, Michelle. That's awesome. I'm liberally using the emoji reactions, so if you guys want to do that, feel free. Lastly, we're going to hear from one of my colleagues in the EdTech Hub, Alison, who's been doing some fantastic work in Bangladesh. Alison, why don't you tell us about it?
Yes, thank you, Asad. So I'm a member of the Specialist Network. I also work at UCL Institute of Education, where my expertise is in educational evaluation and thinking about educational technology in that. And the hub was approached actually by one of the CSOs in Bangladesh, UNICEF, because UNICEF had observed that in the period from school lockdown last March 2020 in Bangladesh, when the government responded very quickly with a plan for remote education that outlined all the different pieces of the jigsaw that needed to be sort of put into play to enable some education to continue for the children in Bangladesh, 6 months on, nobody really quite knew how that had played out. So everybody got busy and everybody went off and worked extremely hard on their different projects, reaching learners in very challenging geographical situations, or working particularly on, say, the radio or the mobile platforms that the government was promoting. And it got to the point where there wasn't a way to bring everybody back together again to say, how are we doing? What's working? What's not working? What do we actually want to learn from this when we come through this pandemic with regards to the strategy for educational technology as part of the Digital Bangladesh priorities? So what we did was we tried to bring the important and key players into the room together, all virtual, all done in these sorts of environments, using creative collaborative boards to try and share ideas and involve people, which is another challenge we have had to cope with over this year, but we've been creative in that one. But what we did was we asked all of those stakeholders who were creating some solution towards the digital education goals to share their story, tell us about what they did, tell us how they were beginning to gather evidence about the impact of the resources they were creating, or the platforms they were developing, or the very old school leaflets distributions that were going on in part of the remote parts of the country, to try to understand how would we know if some of these initiatives were working? And what we did was, interestingly, we started to develop a theory, and it was our theory from our perspective of how the educational technologies were changing the educational experiences for the learners. And over the subsequent 6 months, with about 4 iterations of workshops that brought in tiny SMEs, tiny enterprises, doing things right through to the government departments of mass primary education, of A2I, who are a big technical support part of the Bangladesh government. We all looked at this theory of change to critique it, to try to think whether it was going to be helpful to be able to sense whether or not things were working, and therefore where were the gaps? Where were we missing particular learners, either because they have particular socioeconomic situation, or they might have learning disabilities or physical disabilities. So how could we get a sense of whether we were reaching all of the children in Bangladesh? And if not, what were the sorts of programs and initiatives that we might need to think about designing in the future? So it was very messy. It really made our brains hurt, all of us, and it still makes our brains hurt, but we've ended at a point where we think we've got something that is going to help both the government and the CSOs and all of the people and the stakeholders to work towards some common goals in the way that we think about educational technology.
Thanks, Alison. Thank you very much. That is a wrap, I think, for stage 1. Alice, I'm going to hand back over to you.
Thanks, Asad. And I'm just very quickly showing the festival map once again, because we are at that moment where you will get to discuss what you have just heard with a couple of other people in a breakout room. So Mike, I can see your hand is up, but instead of letting you speak, I'm going to encourage you to discuss it with your roommates. You should be, by the magic that is Miranda, you should be whisked off to a breakout room. So hopefully we've got enough moments for people to chat like the one you just had that will help people feel that they're not just being silenced. But also all of the discussions you do have, we're going to try and get some of the insights from some of the EdTech Hub people who were in the room with you. They've been jotting down some notes, and we'll make sure to share with you all kind of a summary of what we discussed and summary of what happened in the event after the event too, and make any connections needed. So I just really wanted to acknowledge that because, as Mike said, the irony, the irony of the Festival of Voices having a disabled chat. So now I'm super excited for us to go on to our second stage, which is, if I can, the storytelling screening stage. Over to you, Miranda.
Thank you so much, Alice. Although I might have to correct you because I think it's not a stage. I actually think that we should imagine just for a minute that we're all gathered around a fire because it's actually storytelling time. So for a minute, let's imagine we're all surrounded by a fire and you're kind of glimpsing and catching someone's eye across the flames. You're putting your hands out and you're feeling the warmth against your fingers. Don't get too close, it's quite hot. And there's a kind of moment, isn't there? Normally it takes place at nighttime, but not always. And you sit with it might be friends, it might be strangers, but people who you feel like you can trust and listen to and tell some stories together. So in this moment, I want you to particularly, I invite you to kind of turn off anything that might distract you over the next 40 minutes. Do whatever you need to do, close the door, turn off the email notifications, your phone, just to be really kind of present for the next 40 minutes to listen to some stories, because these in particular are the stories from, I think, the most important voices of this whole festival, and particularly voices that often go unheard, particularly in high-level conversations about the design and implementation of EdTech. And these are the voices of learners, of teachers, of caregivers, and of parents. So I'm going to invite a group of people today to come and share some work that they've been doing this year, some work they've been doing to listen really, really deeply to the experiences and the context and the lives of teachers and parents and caregivers during the pandemic. And what you'll see as these some bits on this screen here are shared, and this is going to be some audio and some video and some writing too, and you'll see some really polished kind of products, if you like, some polished stories. But what you won't see is the many hours that I know this group have put in to build up trust and relationships with teachers and caregivers and parents, in order for them to be able to kind of share their experiences, because often they don't feel like they're able to, because they aren't used to being kind of asked their opinion and being really involved in this way. So have a think about that as I kind of hand over to a new group of people to tell some stories. And as you watch and listen, I also invite you to think about three things. Does any of what you're hearing from these different people kind of challenge an assumption that you held about the lives of parents or teachers or caregivers or the people that we're hearing from? How might your work need to change as a result? And where can you find space in your work, wherever that might be, to really listen, deeply listen to the people, the users of the EdTech who we're designing for in our work. So without further ado, I would love to first invite Michelle to talk a little bit about the storytelling and the story gathering that she did and with her team as part of Jusor. Michelle, over to you.
Thank you, Miranda. So our storytelling output is a video that we produced, and that tells the stories of the caregivers and the children during the lockdown that they experienced and their struggles with learning over WhatsApp. So I talked in the last section about the experiments that we implemented in order for us to try to improve children's experience with the WhatsApp learning. And what you'll see in this video is their impressions and their voices telling us how did these experiments go for them and if they actually helped them. Thank you.
هلا اكيد انه درسهم بالبيت غير لما بالمدرسه ويشوفوا رفقاتهم ويشوفوا الاولاد.
هلا وقت اللي كان في مدرسه خلص كان من الصبح للمساء في نظام.
بالمدرسه غير البيت، يعني تعليم المدرسه غير تعليم البيت.
يعني بينما يكون الطالب وجه لوجه مع الاستاذ، عم يشوف كل شيء، الشرح، عم يتفاعل، عم يتجاوب، غير لما يكون قاعد بالبيت من وراء الشاشه. يعني
تركيز اكثر ويعني ويستفيد اكثر.
هو عم يدرس على الاونلاين هلا، بس شو بصعوبه.
كثير شغلات يعني انا عم لاحظها على الاولاد انه عم يفهموها. يعني
اكثر شيء فادتني انه ننظم وقت مخصص للطفل، مو شرط انه بس تعليم، كتعليم وكاستوعاب وكالجو البيت او اللعب برا او شيء.
كانت كثير مهمه للطلاب، ويعني انا بحكي عن اولادي، يعني كانوا كثير عم يتفاعلوا، عم يتجاوبوا، وعم يسمعوها مره ومرتين وثلاثه.
قال لنا يعني لازم ننظم وقتنا للدراسة وننظم وقتنا للعب وننظم وقتنا للأكل.
شيء أكيد لما تبعتوا لنا إنه كيف بدنا ندير الطفل بالبيت، يعني صار وقته تنظيمه، وقت الدراسة دراسة، وقت كذا، يعني نظمنا له وقته. يعني نحن
ما نخلي مثلا شيء شغال تلفزيون كذا هيك، خلص وقت الدرس درس كله بالمدرسة.
اوقات التليفون ما موفر على طول استاذه، بتعرفي انت ما كل بيت فيه تليفونين وثلاثه، يعني لحتى كل واحد ياخذ تليفون ويصير.
انه يعني نفضل انه يكون هو تليفونه لحال، تليفوني لحال، يعني مشان ما بنتسرع لما بدنا نحل أمه هيك، بنكون يعني كل واحد على راحته يحل وهيك.
أنا نقلت التليفون، لقيته يعني بشده أكثر، وقت تليفونه يقول لي منزوع ما بدي أدرس، منزوع. وقت إجا التليفون لحد الآن يقول له بابا لا تلمسه، بابا لا تلمسه، هاي للمدرسة لإلي.
أنا بالنسبة للمساعدة اللي أنتم قدمتوها، أنا اخترت المساعدة المالية، أولاً لأنه إذا بدي آخذ تليفون بدي أحافظ عليه، وعندي أولاد كثير، وإذا صاروا أي شيء التليفون بدي أتحمل مسؤوليته. يعني فهمت علي شلون؟ مشان هيك اخترت مساعدة مالية، مثلا نحط فيه نت، نحط فيه كذا، مشان مع إنه عندي تليفون واحد بحاجة تليفون ثاني. يعني
لحتى نشوف كيف بيصير الوضع، بنرجع الطلاب على المدرسة، يعني بصير عندهم شوي نفسيتهم بترتاح، مثل ما بنقول أمل إنه يرجعوا على المدرسة، يعني بيكونوا مع الأستاذ بالصف وجه لوجه.
Thank you so much, Michelle. And just to follow up on that beautiful film, I'd love to sort of kind of get behind the scenes a bit and understand a bit more about how you went about kind of gathering these stories from the people you spoke to, and what was the impact you feel on your work overall, in your words?
Sure. So I would like to pick it up maybe from the conclusion of the video, which says that we found that most of the parents valued their children's education when we implemented this experiment. And when we started, this for us was not a given, because remember, we're dealing with a refugee community who face a lot of hardships, including economic difficulties and challenges. So it's not always a given that their children's education comes at the top of their priorities. But it was through this experiment that we understood that really when they're given the help that they need, they do actually, they are ready to invest in their children's education. And so this for us was the biggest learning from the experiment and the sandbox we conducted. Now, in order for us to gather these stories, we really had to use the trust that we built with the community over the years in order for them to commit also their time and to come to us and to tell us their stories. because what you saw is the impact of the experiment that were going on, but behind the scenes, we also listened to the struggles, to the difficulties that they were living during the pandemic and all of this. For us, there is also one thing that's very important, that we always try to listen to our beneficiaries and have their feedback, and not always the positive. So in the video, it was overwhelmingly positive, but it's because the people who were willing to really commit and come spend some time with us were doing so because they felt it had a positive impact on them. But we are also very keen on hearing the negative feedback sometimes from our communities and what doesn't work for them. And this is very essential for our work, because it is this trust component that allows us to really always go forward and grow in our programs. At the end of the day, it's the beneficiaries that are going to tell us if what we are doing is really working, because they are the end users of the services we provide. And even if we spend a lot of time trying to design interventions and think about all the details, but in the end of the day, if it doesn't work for the beneficiaries, it means we're not doing the right thing. So going back to the beneficiary is very important, because they're kind of the compass to our work. And they also give us the human dimension. Sometimes we get lost in numbers and percentages and statistics, etc. But it's always very important to remind ourselves why we're here and what is our purpose. And including them in this storytelling work was very powerful for us, because indeed it reminded us of that. So we had our teachers who are also the real heroes of our work, especially during the pandemic. They got in touch with the parents, and many of them agreed indeed to come to our centers to give us some of their time and to explain to us what they were going through the pandemic, and how did our sandbox, in what ways helped them, or maybe it didn't, and where we should also be improving for the next period.
Great, thank you so much, Michelle. Lovely, and I'm going to kind of move around the fire a little bit now to Deaf Reach, and welcome Sarah, Ramsha and Taiba to the centre of the fire to tell their story about hearing from the deaf community over the pandemic. Sarah, please tell us a little bit about this.
Thanks, Miranda. I think it's been a very interesting journey for all of us, because when the pandemic happened, we disconnected physically. So our deaf community hails from peri-urban and rural areas, and we pick and drop them up from a 40-kilometer radius. And suddenly we didn't have any contact with them, and there was no way you could pick up the phone and call them or text them, because the majority of the parents were illiterate. So we thought of what to do, how to design things, but like I mentioned earlier, our focus shifted from the teacher-student paradigm to the parent-student paradigm. And through this process, I think when we were designing the project, the goal was to simply monitor or measure what our outcomes are. But we really never thought of how, in the beginning, we would capture these experiences and what's really happening with people. So when we started our journey with the sandbox, we realized that not only are we implementing a project, but we really want to figure out how this process was for the entire group of beneficiaries. And in that sense, it would become the parent, the teacher, and the child. We spent a whole year making video resources, and that's why we decided this time we're going to go through print, because the people we were speaking to ranged from parents who had lost their jobs to mothers who were now earning and becoming the sole income earner, as well as homemakers, to children who had to take care of sick parents. And what we figured out was that we really need to talk to our people in a human-centric way, because usually interventions happen in a nonprofit and you study the kids, you talk to the parents, build a case study, guided and directed on the project that you've implemented. This was the first time where we put the project to the side and we said, come on, let's talk to everyone about what happened in the past year. However, in doing so, we realized that we were getting embroiled in a lot of stories, personal aspects, big picture items that might not really feed into our journey. And that's why we figured out it's very important to talk to people so that you can have the necessary outcomes that you're looking for from this conversation. So the interpretive approach of the study wasn't lost because we worked on a structure, on a methodology while it was free-flowing. And then you want to make sure that we could address the dialectic nature of all the various components. So talking to the parents, talking to the kids, the teachers. This was the first time they were all sitting together in the same room and had access to management, to the principals. And this guided all the iterations that we made into our interventions.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And really good to pause on this page actually and ask you, Ramsha, about how you went about doing this, because I know there was a lot of tools created to help you to uncover stories with people that you spoke to. Can you tell us a bit about how you did this?
Thank you, Randa. So hello everyone, my name is Ramsha and I work with DeafReach, and I'll be shedding some light on the process of our storytelling exploration carried out with different deaf communities in Pakistan. So we basically carried out this study with the support of principals and coordinators from DeafReach schools in Karachi, Hyderabad and Sakar, and to complete the whole process of storytelling exploration from plannings to findings. The cycle took us 4 months approx. So the goal was to document the benefit, ease or challenges of using different processes to knowledge attainment and learning. So we thought instead of creating a cliche story or a case study, the key objective was to explore the experiences of deaf community during 2020 till 21 pandemic, and also to create a multi-layered process of data collection with the help of our target audience. So we picked teachers and students, parents, and supporting staff as our participants from the DeafReach community, and they participated us with the storytelling project with us. So just quickly, I'll walk through some of our data collection tools and strategies that were semi-structured interview guidelines, voice and video recordings, focus group discussions. We conducted in-person and WhatsApp-based questions and answer to a more casual and thorough explanation of key themes emerged from the data collected, participants' experience and way forward. We also had elements like emotional mood tracker, stickers to express feelings and their moods, exploring the wheel of life to see how the candidates are faring as people. We also use illustration and graphics, Zoom meetings, constructive discussions, and conversation approaches. And for validating our data collection tools, we asked few experts from DeafReach School, Karachi, who had an understanding of our study, professional experiences, and in a related field. They evaluated whether the items given in tools, interview guides, observation, and FGD tools captured the study under consideration. So how we analyze this data, we analyzed it through a document content analysis using pictures and activity sheets, translations and transcription of audio and voice recordings. For me, it was indeed an exigent process since we were interacting with the deaf people, designing tools for the deaf people. Hence, we have to consider multiple of things in order to execute this journey smoothly. And indeed, it was a challenging task to utilize our resources, for example, interpreters and our deaf participants at play to bring out the most powerful stories. Also, the stories that you will be seeing in this flipbook are a product of an intense struggle, hard work, and consistency. For this project, we used an ethnographic research strategy for our storytelling documentation that explores the lives of deaf participants through the narratives of their professional personal experiences during the 2020 to 2020 and 21 pandemic. The stories also suggest that deaf identity is not a static concept, but a complex ongoing quest for belonging, and a quest that is bound with the acceptance of being deaf while finding one's voice in a hearing dominant society. And so through the use of dialogues and narrative tools, we have brought these voices to you.
Thank you, Ramsha. It was really, really great to hear the huge amount of work that's gone into this, and and also what appears to be such a simple and beautiful output where the voices really speak to us and tell us things, but also knowing what went on behind the scenes. So Taiba, my kind of question to you would be, what would you advise others to do if there are others in this room who would like to do something similar? What would be your kind of top tips?
Oh, hi, Miranda. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. This is Taiba Beg from Deaf-Read Community, Pakistan. So my advice would be during throughout the process that we have been engaged with the EdTech storytelling journey, what we have biggest challenge faced is the making online coordination and communication with our teams, whether it's EdTech or the team from Pakistan. Maintaining the connection was a bit hard for us. Keeping the records of data that we gathered and to proper organization of that data was a bit challenging because due to the connectivity and electricity issues. So one of the important advice
I think we've lost Taiba.
I was going to say, just as she was explaining the difficulty of connection. Are you with us, Taiba? Oh no, I might have to pass back over to you, Sarah. Okay, we'll give her another minute.
Sorry, just checking in if Taiba can join back.
Yeah.
But I just have a summary of our recommendations and I'll run through that. Taiba and Ramsha have been the people on the ground who've been talking to the parents and the team. And as we talked about this Festival of Voices, we wanted to make sure we included them. So we've come up with some responses that we'd like to implement in the coming iterations, where we talk about adding digital resources to teacher capacity building program, find ways to connect the deaf community and share their stories with the program designers, and then develop pieces of training on digital literacy and 21st century skills for our deaf learners and teachers both. Because we saw that online connectivity, tech support, and just basic ICT skills were missing in the group that we were working with. That is the next recommendation that follows, where we'd like to improve ICT skills. And all these learnings came out from the process where we figured out through this journey what we actually need to do to make sure EdTech can actually work with us.
Wonderful. That's great timing, just as we get to the end of this beautiful flip book. And of course, I'm sure this will be available for everyone to kind of dig into as well. Absolutely. After this session, because there's too much in there to possibly read in this short space of time.
I think it's a flip book that needs your time and attention. And that's why we wanted to focus on how we collected the stories and who the beneficiaries are. Because like you said, imagine sitting around a fire. This is something you want to keep with you and really delve into it to figure out how people spent their life over the past year.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Sarah. And hopefully Taiba will be able to join us again shortly. But for now, we're going to move over to our final story of this kind of fireside time. And I'm so excited to introduce Tracy, who we have all know about so far as the star who created our beautiful festival map, but her talents do not end there, because she's going to be sharing with us too what the Keep Kenya Learning team have been doing to kind of gather stories and understand the experiences of caregivers over the pandemic. So Tracy, I'm going to hand over to you to kind of introduce what you'd like to present today.
Cool. Okay. So for Keep Kenya Learning, our main storytelling output was through a podcast. and we wanted to immerse everyone into what it took to get this campaign up and running. So from all points of view, from how the COVID-19 pandemic affected caregivers, and we listened to that, and what it took with the campaign leaders to get this campaign up and running, and also our content partners and every other person that was part and parcel of the Keep Kenya Learning campaign. Obviously, I couldn't play the entire podcast right now during the Festival of Voices, but I prepared a short video that Alice is going to play for us. And you can also look for the podcast at all your favorite streaming platforms, Keep Kenya Learning. Yeah. Over to you, Alice.
In March 2020, the Kenyan government shut down schools indefinitely in hopes to curb the spread and effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. School closures interrupted learning for over 17 million students in Kenya who missed more than 6 months of formal education. In this period, we reached out to parents and caregivers to understand what they needed to help their learners at home. We heard the frustrations about lack of clarity on whether they should continue learning, what they should be learning, and how to find the right resources. And as a result, we started the Keep Kenya Learning campaign to help provide these answers. As part of the EdTech sandboxes, Keep Kenya Learning learned a lot. We learned how to plan, how to execute, storyboarding, iteration, and how to better collaborate with other people worldwide. But most importantly, we learned how to humanize our stories, how to let people authentically tell their own stories, which is why we're here today in this Festival of Voices. Meet Josephine. Josephine and her son are a good example of one of the 300 caregivers and children that Keep Kenya Learning was able to help access learning resources at home. Throughout the podcast, we not only get to listen to Keep Kenya Learning's journey and lessons while supporting caregivers to carry out learning at home, we get to listen to the individual voices of their caregivers. We get a glimpse into their lives. You get to listen to experiences of parents like Josephine and Zam, that they're not only parents, but people too. People with jobs and interests. Like Zam, she's a social worker. She raised awareness in her community on COVID-19, helping her own children and others in her community understand why they couldn't go to school anymore and how to best adapt to their current home learning situation. Josephine, she's a parent and a caregiver too. She helped take care of and facilitated at-home learning for both her own children and those in her community. This helped her earn a living as a caregiver and give other parents time to go to work, knowing their children were in safe hands. With access to learning resources through both smartphones and feature phones, what we locally refer to as kabambas, and a community of fellow parents and caregivers to learn with and from, we received valuable feedback from the Kenyan community. Children are more active in helping around the house, they have better conversational skills, their interest in learning has increased, and they're bonding with their parents more through storytelling. Visit www.keepkenyalearning.com for free learning resources and have a listen to our podcast on all your favorite streaming platforms, including Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Anchor FM, to learn what it took and what it's currently taking to keep Kenya learning.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Tracy. I'd also love to ask you actually a similar question to Taiba, and I guess what were some of the key things that you learned personally through this experience of like spending that time kind of gathering those stories?
One of the things that really stood out was that you never know the impact of the work you're doing until you go out into the field. Which you said, this is like a collective answer to all those questions. My advice to people would be, yes, implement your idea, but then go to the field and listen to the individual stories of how your idea is affecting and impacting the lives of other people, because that's what gives you the motivation to go on, to get those stories and to keep on working every day.
Beautiful. Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And of course, you'll all get to hear more if you go listen to that podcast. We have a good 10 minutes of this kind of part of the festival left, and I'd really love to take this opportunity to take a question from the audience. If there's something you'd like to, particularly perhaps a question which you can ask to all of our storytellers today, about their kind of process of storytelling, or something else. Would anyone like to come off mute and ask a burning question? No need to use the chat, honestly.
Can I ask, this, I mean, if it's a naive question and everybody else knows the answer, then we're on something else. How do you reconcile this sandbox idea against something I read? Tim Unwin, who's closely associated with EdTech Hub, I read something that he'd written about these packs for most disadvantaged, digital learning in most disadvantaged environments. And he emphasizes, don't start with a small pilot in somewhere where you think it's going to work. Plan initially for going to scale, and plan and try and implement it in the place that's most challenging, because that's when you'll see if it works and whether it's worth going on. And to me, the sandbox idea, which is the way I would have gone about things myself traditionally, seems to be the other end of the continuum. Am I right, or have I misunderstood it?
Shall I can jump in. Well, there's a few people I think could answer that one. Asad, I see you coming off mute as well. I think from our perspective, it's trying to do both things at once. So holding both this ambition for scale and the thinking big, but at the same time as starting small. So that both of those things are true. And absolutely what Tim says about thinking about scale and not going to the easy places, thinking about your most challenging questions is something we definitely push through in the sandboxes too. So hopefully something we can discuss a bit more in the next section of the event, when we'll be digging into some more of those sandbox principles. But I know, Miranda, you were very keen to know if anyone had questions more specifically around the storytelling and those stories we just heard from Deaf Reach, just saw, and from Keep Kenya Learning. If anyone does have a question that's maybe a little bit more directed at the guys who just presented, and then Jason, hopefully we can pick up that conversation a little bit later in the event.
One question, with all the storytelling, it's great to help people really connect. And I thought, a lot of the storytellers clearly considered, keeping it dignified. So I was wondering if anyone would like to comment about the balance between showing how hard things really can be whilst maintaining the dignity and, of the service users.
I think that's a great question. If I may, Michelle, I would love to ask you what you think about that.
Sure. So for us, maintaining the dignity of the beneficiaries part is very important. And as I said, in the storytelling, at least in the video that we showed, it was intentional for us not to show, any maybe like drama or emphasize a lot the problems that the beneficiaries go through, because I think no one really wants also to appear like that publicly. For us, so the beneficiaries, yes, they do have their problems, of course, that they deal with, but they are keen on improving their lives and on doing so also while preserving their dignity. And it's very important for us to shed the light on this. So even when we talk about problems, there is a certain approach that we do with that. When we asked them actually to share their stories, we gave them the complete freedom to share what they want to share. We didn't want to push or to direct the conversation anywhere that would help us maybe generate more compassion in a way with the beneficiaries. But no, it's like showing them as human beings in their dignity, that they do have certain circumstances, special circumstances that they're going through because they're beneficiaries. But our work is directed to help them through these circumstances, but of course treating them always as human beings that deserve the dignity just as everyone else does.
Thank you, Michelle. And actually also Deaf Reach, I think a really relevant example to share here is the tool that you used about the emotional wheel, which I don't know if one of you'd like to explain a bit more about that, but that was the aim of that was really about ensuring that people are talking about what they want to talk about.
Sure. I think one of the most interesting parts of our journey was that people wanted to actually talk to us. They wanted us to know what happened during the year. But what was happening was there was oversharing, there was a digression into personal stories, and then it escalated into requests for personal help. So again, you know, keeping the dignity of the beneficiary and their families, and also balancing what the organization really wanted to achieve. I think these tools that we designed, the questionnaires and the Wheel of Life, really internalized this process for our participants. And then they could focus and look at their life as a whole. So it wasn't about what do I need to say to Deaf Reach? It's about who they are and where they're at that particular stage in life. And then through the process, we kept working with them. And there were some very sensitive topics that are mentioned in this documented story. But if we took them out and then we sent the story back for review, they insisted that certain parts be retained because they wanted not to focus on the struggle that they've had, but to show everyone that despite COVID, despite the challenges, they had solutions and they could overcome their challenges. So I think that was really a respectful way of working with our beneficiaries, where you could not just focus on the compassion side, the challenge side, but also really highlight how people A, accepted what they couldn't change, and B, took it upon themselves to go the extra mile, whether it was taking care of their house, the economic situation that they're dealing with, mental health conditions. And I think that's been the biggest highlight of our journey with our beneficiaries.
Lovely, thanks, Sarah. Any more questions from the audience? That was a fantastic one. Anyone else got one?
Hi, can you hear me?
Certainly can. Fire away, Alex.
Thanks for all the information that has been shared. It has been wonderful. I would like to ask, considering that the collaboration between educators and parents is very important for the academic success of all pupils, do you have any recommendations of how this collaboration between teachers and parents can be preserved with regards to technology use at home after the lockdown and when children get back to school?
This feels like another big question that we might get to in the next section. Alice, what do you think?
I was just thinking the same thing. So if everyone's happy to, we are around the time we were going to go on to our next stage. So that's not to shut down your question at all, Alexia. And in fact, similar to Jason's, I feel like they're perfect segues to our next bit. So thank you both. I will just share my screen once again to to transport us through our festival map, and really the next section, the next stage, is about exploring these next 3 principles, which we kind of categorize as being about reaching systemic impact. So it's really linking actually to both your questions there, Jason and Alexia, around what we're saying about starting small and experimenting, but going to scale, and as well as for us about how you build on the things we're learning. And so I think, Alexia, some of what you said there around how do we build on what we've managed to establish now longer term. And for us, that's something we're really keen to think through, especially with those people who are in the room here today who you've heard from. So just like last time, I'm going to actually hand over to Asad to introduce us to this and to hear from our speakers. But I just wanted to reiterate one more time. Obviously the chat isn't working, but what we're going to do at the end of this is have a little discussion moment, and we'll make sure we're trying to capture as much of what people talk about and then connect people later. So we'll try and keep these conversations going. Asad, over to you.
Thanks, Alice. Yeah, and I think the stories that we just heard really give an insight into how complex the systems in which we all work can be. So I think this is the perfect theme and stage to come next around reaching systemic impact. And we have some principles for working within these complex systems in our sandboxes. And probably the most important one of those is to always be treating the system as the unit of experimentation. So we don't, in our sandboxes, focus on the technology, but we focus on a broader system of factors that need to work together to make impact at scale. And maybe this is a good chance to answer your really smart question, Jason, about pilots versus sandboxes, because in my experience, pilots tend to focus on the technology as the first, and they're a first stage before a wider rollout. And something that I sometimes say to differentiate between a pilot and the sandbox is that sandboxes focus on a place, often a very difficult place, and experiment with all the factors that might solve a problem in that place. It can be really hard to hold a whole system in your head. So we've created this simple framework, which we call the 6 Ps. One of the Ps is product, so the technology product, but also you'll see there we have people, policy, place, pedagogy, and provision. And it really helps us make sure we're considering everything we need to consider. For example, with people, what's the role of family members? With policy, have we engaged with government and are we aligned with their policy? With provision, how are we ensuring a sustainable funding model? So thinking about all of these things as quickly as you can really helps us make sure that whatever we're doing is ready for scale. So that's a really key principle for us. The second one around reaching systemic impact is to make sure that we give a mix of actors a seat at the table. So every team we have in the sandbox draws on a mix of expertise, from technologists to educators, to contextual expertise, to experts in other aspects of growth like financial modeling or supply chains, as well as all the people that you see on the screen there. And one comment maybe to make on this is that we try really, really hard to make sure we have a give-get for each participant. So there's an incentive for each participant or type of participant to be involved. So we're not just asking them to help us, but we're giving them something back. So for example, when we enroll governments for their expertise on policy and their engagement, in return, we connect them to EdTech interventions that are validated and trying to solve real problems. But of course, it's not just about getting lots of different expertise around the table. It's also about making sure all voices are heard, as we talked about before, and particularly the voices of teachers, caregivers, and communities. One of the principles for digital development, in fact, the first principle, I believe, for digital development is to design with the user in mind. So maybe the most important actor, and we try and co-create with caregivers, teachers, and communities as much as possible, as Sarah and Tracy and Michelle and everyone just talked through. Our final principle is to always partner and build on what's already out there. So we try and ask this question as much as possible: what's already working, and how can we do more of it? And we try and support as much as we can what's already happening, rather than starting things from scratch. That's actually one of the reasons why we're doing this event, to find each other, talk to each other, and build on each other's learning. So those are our final 3 principles. Those are our 6 principles. And as before, I'm going to hand over to some of our colleagues to talk through how they've actually applied them in practice. I'm going to start with one of my colleagues from the EdTech Hub, Casper. Casper, if you could make sure you introduce yourself for everyone before you start talking, and tell us about your experience of these principles and your work in Zanzibar.
Thank you so much for that, Assad. My name is Caspar Groeneveld. I work with the EdTech Hub, and I'm located in Kenya, normally, but now in Estonia. And my example deals with the first principle, defining the problem and providing an answer to the problem. And that example comes from Zanzibar, which is a semi-autonomous region in Tanzania. It sets its own education policy, although it is largely based on Tanzania. And their question to us was, can you help us implement a virtual learning environment? Well, that's a very broad question. So we asked them, or we asked ourselves, so what is the problem it needs to solve? And that problem statement was not very clear. It ranged from not wanting to be left behind compared to other countries, to not having educational resources, to low learning outcomes. So that remained a bit unclear. And we tried to clarify, as a response to that, we tried to clarify the question, what do you mean then with a virtual learning environment? What do you understand that to be? And that actually proved a remarkably difficult question to answer. And we received from Zanzibar answers that range from, well, we want internet in schools. Well, we need tablets and we need things like that. And that, in my opinion, goes back to the original sin of EdTech. You start with technology and hope that it applies to education rather than the other way around. So we tried to get an answer to that question, and we tried a storytelling exercise. We wanted them to create a narrative or a scenario. So give us an example. What does Fatima do when she comes in school with that virtual learning environment that we're talking about? What does the teacher do? How does she teach in class? How does it work at home, etc., etc.? And first, having them go through this scenario exercise, the storytelling exercise, proved very difficult to explain. It took us a long time to clarify what we wanted from them, that we didn't want numbers on tablets, we want them to tell us a story. And second, the results they come up with in the end were fantastic. We got 4 different scenarios. All of them had different virtual learning environments in mind, but they were consistent in one thing, in that they all failed. They all could, when they started thinking about it, identify very clearly what could go wrong. Internet didn't work, devices weren't there, devices didn't work, there was too much noise, too many students, etc., etc. There was a wonderful list of possible problems that they identified. So let's go full circle back to the problem. How do you find out how you can best help a country and still help them with the question that they have? And I think that a deliberate and iterative approach, like a sandbox, can very much help prevent the government from jumping too quickly to a turnkey solution with a provider that comes along, and instead make sure that they end up with something that solves a problem that they have and that works in the local environment. It takes longer than they want and that they expect, but at least it saves them from adopting a solution that is too expensive and doesn't solve any problems that they might have. So back to you, Asad.
Thanks, Casper. Thank you very much. It's really interesting. I'm going to invite Craig now to talk a bit. Craig, do make sure you introduce yourself and tell us about how your work with radio in rural Uganda addressed some of these principles of reaching systemic impact.
Okay, so my name is Craig Esbeck. I work with Mango Tree Literacy Lab, which works in northern Uganda, and I've been working in education in Uganda since 1997. I want to start by also addressing Jason's really interesting question, because what I wanted to say about that is I don't think you could find a harder place. Well, you probably could, but northern Uganda is a really hard place to implement radio education for children in early primary. So I think if the international NGO of radio educators showed up in northern Uganda and said, we want to do a program, they'd have a lot of problems. But we are a literacy lab. We specifically chose to work in northern Uganda because of the difficulties that are there. And so we're trying to show that if we can have success, in this context, then what we're learning is, valuable and will hopefully resonate with others who are working in really challenging situations. So, but yeah, so that I think it's really important to me that you get the implementers are people who have a history in a place and really know it deeply and well. So I want to talk about this diversity of actors, because there's a lot I could say about that, but we have this very short amount of time. And so the one thing I really want to say, it relates to this give-get thing. We feel it's really important that we do have a diversity of actors, of course. That's, to me, it's clear. But you've got to do more than simply involve them. They've got to really feel like they have bought in. And so we always make sure that they receive an orientation, and that there is they clearly understand their role in the process, what we expect of them, and the ways we're going to hold them accountable, and what we're going to provide them, and how they should hold us accountable. Now, again, because it's a diversity of actors too, we aren't able to train all of those ourselves. We expect then some of those actors to go out and train other actors in the model. And so, of course, we have to really ensure the integrity of the message. And so, again, we always have written like a handbook that each person or each sort of group has, and it's in local language if it's a group that needs it in local language, and they sign a contract. There's always a contract signed, and in our project it went from everybody from the district leaders all the way down to the parents who joined the listening centers. Everyone had a participation contract that they had to sign, and they understood their role. They understood the broader project as well. It's important that people don't just understand what they're doing, but they understand the big picture as well. So that to me, and especially in an environment where we were bringing children into homes in the community to listen to a radio. So there's now suddenly child protection issues that, when we worked in schools, we had the sort of schools were holding that responsibility. And then of course, also the COVID-19 protection issues. We had to show that we were, so this was a particularly challenging environment to make sure that we got it right as far as getting those diverse actors bought in and understanding their role. So I think that's maybe what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Craig. Thank you very much. Rebecca, I'm going to ask you next. I see you're on the road. Can you share some examples of ways that you involve parents in your work? Because I know it was really central to the work you were doing with Keep Kenya Learning. And yeah, as always, do introduce yourself first. So that
yes,
we'll remember who you are.
awesome. Can you all hear me all right? Give a little wave. Yes, Alex is giving me a thumbs up. I love it. Hi, everyone. My name is Rebecca Ume-Crook. I had the immense pleasure and continue to have the immense pleasure of working with the Keep Kenya Learning team. I'm actually calling in from very rural Magadi. And I think that it was such a central part to partner with the people we were seeking to serve, which were our caregivers. Ultimately, like everywhere else in the world, when schools shut, kids couldn't go to school for months at a time. And we thought, okay, how might we support caregivers to lead learning at home? And throughout the sprint process, in the beginning, it was, okay, how do we deeply listen to caregivers and hear their aspirations and frustrations with learning and supporting their kids' learning. And when a lot of our initial hypotheses were really challenged, we actually found that confidence was a big issue for a lot of caregivers. We then not only listened to our caregivers in the design process, so it wasn't just like creating for caregivers, it was creating with caregivers. So of course we had a team of experts who are great at doing SMS messaging and doing video messaging, but we had co-creation sessions with caregivers from the backgrounds we were targeting. So we're working with very rural caregivers, we were working with low-income urban caregivers, and so we worked through partners to be able to have these co-creation sessions so that we could, offer back something that was made by caregivers for caregivers, in partnership with people who had other skill sets with backgrounds in education and tech and behavioral change supporting and holding hands really with caregivers to tackle this really unique challenge we've all been experiencing.
Thanks, Rebecca. And one stakeholder that we haven't talked about so much yet is, of course, the government, who I know were and are and getting more involved in the work. So can you talk us a bit about how during the work you engage them and how their involvement might open up new things for what you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I really appreciate this and being a partner with the EdTech Hub. I think that our coach Daniel was always helping us think about how do we really early on engage government and not only share like our so-called expertise with them from our research, but also tap into their expertise as well. And so in when way back in December of last year, when we were just getting started with our sandbox, we had kind of like expert learning sessions. And so we had various different organizations, and we had someone from KICD, which is the Kenya Institute of Curriculum Development. So we had someone there present her institute's research. And so the government had a seat at the table, again, in this spirit of co-creation. So it wasn't just like, hey, government, you should really implement and scale what we've learned. It was, we share this common challenge and we share a common mission. What do you know about this? And let us share what we know about this. And I think developing that relationship, first and foremost, of respect, I think that's often left out when it comes to government. I think we all kind of like, it's easy to kind of roll your eyes and say, they're the ones with the problem. I think we really am proud of our team for trying a different approach, and that has proved to be really successful for us. So now, 7 months down the line, we've been able to broker a big partnership with them where we are, our KKL team is working with them to adapt and create a caregiver manual that will be rolled out nationally. And that's been really amazing to be invited into this process, something that's going to support caregiver engagement and rolled out through the National Parent Association is something that's a huge honor for us in a way that we really get to scale, the impact that we had, and Tracy and the podcast shares, impacting a few hundred caregivers and now rolling it out nationally. So from our experience, working with government takes a long time, but I think having an approach of respect and humility and partnership early on.
Thanks, Rebecca. Thank you. That's a wrap, I think, for this stage. Back over to you, Alice.
Yeah, perfect timing, everyone. It's pretty amazing. And thank you all for sharing all those amazing examples. It's really, really fantastic to hear, just really how it all works. So I'm sure I speak for everyone when I say it's great to hear that. And you know the drill now. We have, yet again, going to have a moment to go out into breakout rooms to discuss a little bit of what you heard. I'm just going to flash up on the screen those prompting questions again. What do you think of what you heard? What would it take for you to do this sort of work? Or maybe you already do and you want to share that, fantastic. And also just acknowledging there are barriers and challenges to this kind of work too. Involving lots of actors takes a lot of time. So I'd love to hear what people think about, what blocks this kind of work as well. So we will have just under 10 minutes of chat. Just I'm preparing you because I know how everyone doesn't like to be whisked back again, but it will happen just under 10 minutes. And Miranda will send you off in just a moment.
Good, Miranda, again.
I cut you off halfway through, did I, Chiku? I'm so sorry.
You got us mid-air.
No! It's like I planned it.
Get a warning, there's a little thing that comes up saying you got.
I know, but we generally ignore it. And
I can't possibly have 3 seconds left. It's not true. It's not
it's
true.
Not true, no.
Oh, I'm afraid it is true because we've actually only got 5 minutes left of this wonderful festival. And thank you so much for joining us. If we had the chat, what I would ask you to do was just to write a quick a quick reflection of you know, the maybe one takeaway for you from this event today. But in the absence of that, I'm going to ask something quite controversial, which let's see how it goes. But just for a minute, if you'd like to come off mute and everyone just shout one word to describe the festival today, and let's just see what comes out. So as and when you like.
Oh.
Right.
Amazing.
Joyful.
Enlightening.
And I think
Opening up.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Friendly.
Keep going, keep going.
Seeing some old faces that I haven't seen, like Craig. I last saw you, Craig, at Mango Tree about 15 years ago.
Oh.
Reunion.
Reunion is the word. That's the one word. Yeah.
Inspired and motivated, Miranda.
Great, lovely words.
Enjoyable. And educative.
Yes.
Stimulating.
Yep.
Hopeful.
Lovely. Keep going. If you haven't spoken, please, we'd love to hear your voice.
A global party. We're celebrating Eid in Pakistan, and this is one of the best ways it could have happened. It's amazing. I just keep saying, if we didn't have COVID, I would have never met any of you.
Yeah. True.
Any of you. I don't think my paths would have crossed with any of the 30, 40 people in this group. So fantastic.
I have so many questions, and I would wonder how one can keep up and sort of continue debating or asking questions to particular people or to EdTech for that matter.
Yes, Wolfgang, I'm so glad you asked, because we absolutely want to keep the conversation going. And this was a festival of voices, and you are all included in that. And to kind of make sure, I know that we didn't have the chat today, which was disappointing. So what we're going to do after this session is we're going to spend a couple of days really going through this recording and writing up everything that kind of came out of today, so that you have all of that, and that we really have a record of the collective conversation that we've had today. And we'll send that all out by email. But if there are specific questions that you have, either for the EdTech Hub or for the individual speakers today, just do email us back, and we'd love to be the connector and the convener. That is also what we're here to do. So just let us know and reply to that email when we do send one out in a couple of days, and we will do our best to connect those dots and get people connected as quickly as possible, because obviously if we were all in real life together, this is exactly what would happen. So we will do our best to do that. The other way that you can find people as well is through Twitter. So Jennifer has been, brilliant Jennifer has been live tweeting this whole event. So if you follow the Global EdTech Hub on Twitter, you'll be able to kind of, through that conversation, find all the presenters and all the organizations who've been speaking today, and strike up a conversation through Twitter and find them that way. So there are a few ways of doing it there. And so with that, I think I'd love to say a huge thank you to you all for being here, but also particularly all of our presenters. So that's Sarah, that's Ramsha, that's Fiber, Craig, Rebecca, Alison, Casper, Michelle, Tracy, of course, Alice and Asad and Lee as well. And also a shout out to all the people who have been kind of working behind the scenes on this event, who you might not have heard from, but have been really crucial. So thank you to Jennifer, to Prashi, to Chiku, to Taye, and Tracy obviously created our map, and Tiber who created the flyer for this event. As you can see, it really has been a festival of voices, but also of skills, and a real community effort by the kind of members of the Sandbox community, who are the ones presenting today, as well as the EdTech Hub. So thank you to everyone, and let's stay in touch.